They say some stories do not just entertain, they change us. Welcome to Vale Marks, where every tale reveals not only the bond between humans and their loyal dogs, but also the quiet lessons life teaches us all. In this emotional journey, discover how a scarred pit bull named Ranger, a grieving veteran, and a woman seeking the truth, defied loss and built a family not by blood, but by choice. This is more than a story. It holds a timeless message of redemption and belonging. Stay until the very end. You will carry its meaning long after the final scene. And if it touches your heart, please subscribe and share your thoughts. Your support helps us create more meaningful videos for everyone. No one could explain why the old pit bull with a faded scar across his muzzle stood alone in the fields that stormy night. His name was Ranger, though most in the town of Lone Hollow had long forgotten the dog even existed. Under a sky fractured by lightning and the low growl of distant thunder, Ranger did not pace nervously or seek shelter. He stood firm, his muscles tense, eyes fixed toward the dark outline of the forest beyond the pasture fence. Inside the farmhouse, Ethan Cole stirred restlessly in his sleep. The rain tapped against the window panes like impatient fingers. It had been 2 months since he returned to Montana, carrying more regrets than luggage. His father was gone. The family ranch had withered into disrepair, and every night the weight of unfinished conversations pressed against his dreams. But on this night, it wasn't sorrow or old memories that woke him. It was the dog's bark. Ranger's deep, urgent voice shattered the quiet like a gunshot, then another bark, then another. A sharp, commanding rhythm that demanded Ethan's immediate attention. Ethan bolted upright on the worn couch where he had been dozing. He grabbed the flashlight he kept by the door out of habit, a habit left over from years as a firefighter when emergencies rarely waited until dawn. "Ranger?" he called out into the shadows of the living room. The dog answered with another bark, louder this time. By the time Ethan yanked on his boots and shrugged into a rain jacket, Ranger was already at the fence line, tail stiff, muscles rigid. His gaze locked on the forest like a sentry spotting a threat. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, his voice tense. Ranger barked again, took 3 steps toward the woods, then paused to make sure Ethan was following. His soaked fur gleamed silver whenever the lightning flashed. Without another thought, Ethan followed the dog. The rain had softened the ground, making every step a battle against mud and tall grass. The flashlight's narrow beam sliced through the darkness, revealing little more than swaying branches and drifting mist. Ranger moved ahead with purpose, his paws barely making a sound. Ethan's breath came fast, not from exertion, but from a growing sense of dread he couldn't explain. Ranger had never acted like this before. The dog led him toward the old logging trail that bordered the property. Beyond that lay a tangle of dense pine and ash trees. The forest had a reputation. Locals whispered that it held more than just wildlife. Old homesteads. Forgotten tragedies. Secrets no one cared to unearth. But Ranger plunged ahead without hesitation. The flashlight's beam swept across the ground, catching footprints that didn't belong there. Smaller, lighter than Ethan's boots. Barefoot impressions deep in the mud, trailing toward the trees. "Someone's out here," Ethan muttered, gripping the flashlight tighter. As they entered the woods, the temperature dropped sharply. Rain dripped from the branches overhead, tapping softly like a warning. Ranger veered left, weaving between tree trunks until he stopped abruptly at the edge of a narrow clearing. That's when Ethan saw it. A small cabin sat hunched beneath a massive ash tree, its weathered roof sagging under decades of decay. The windows were boarded shut, and vines choked the walls. But what drew Ethan's attention wasn't the building itself. It was the faint glimmer of light seeping through a crack in the door. "Stay back," Ethan whispered. though he doubted the dog would obey. He approached the cabin cautiously, every firefighter's instinct on high alert. The air smelled of damp earth and something sour. His flashlight beam danced across the door. Scratches marred the wood near the latch, and the faint outline of a handprint smeared in mud, or was it blood, streaked the lower panel. Ranger growled low in his throat. Ethan pressed an ear to the door. On the other side came the softest sound, a faint, ragged breath. Without wasting another second, he braced his shoulder against the door and shoved. The wood groaned, but held. He tried again, harder this time, until the frame splintered with a sharp crack. The door swung open into darkness. The flashlight revealed a small room, walls lined with rotting shelves. In the far corner, crumpled on the floor, lay a woman. Her hair was damp and tangled, her skin pale beneath the grime. A scrap of cloth tied around her wrist suggested she'd been restrained. "Ma'am?" Ethan called out, stepping inside. No response. Only that fragile breath. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside her. A quick check of her pulse revealed it was faint but steady. She was alive, but just barely. "Hang in there," Ethan whispered, removing his jacket and wrapping it around her shoulders. He lifted her carefully. She weighed almost nothing. Years of carrying unconscious civilians through burning buildings had taught him how to move quickly and gently. As he backed toward the door, Ranger stood aside, his eyes never leaving the woman's motionless form. Outside, the storm had begun to ease. The rain softened to a drizzle, and the air smelled cleaner somehow, as if the worst had passed. Ethan laid the woman down on a patch of grass just beyond the cabin steps. He grabbed his phone, praying for a signal. Miraculously, a single bar flickered to life. He called 911 and relayed their location, though he warned the dispatcher that access to the site would be difficult. "Stay with me," Ethan urged the woman softly. "Help's on the way." Her eyelids fluttered briefly, revealing eyes filled with confusion and terror. She tried to speak, but only managed a rasp. "Don't talk. Just breathe." Ranger moved closer, lowering his head until his nose nearly touched her arm. It was only then that Ethan noticed the delicate necklace tangled in the woman's hair, a small silver pendant bearing the letter D. He didn't know what it meant. Not yet, but something told him this was only the beginning. 2 weeks before that stormy night, the ranch did not echo with the sounds of rescue or danger. It stood silent beneath the wide Montana sky, the autumn wind whispering through the tall grass and brittle fence lines. Ethan Cole arrived at the property under a cloud heavier than any weather: grief. The house, once solid and full of life, had grown old in his absence. The paint peeled from the walls, shingles curled up on the roof, and the barn doors hung crooked on rusted hinges. His father's tools lay scattered in the shed, just as they had the day Everett Cole collapsed from the heart attack that claimed his life. Ethan stepped out of his pickup, boots sinking into the soft earth. The last time he had stood here had been years ago. He had left Montana to join the city fire department, seeking a life of service far from the shadows of family expectations. But no matter how far he ran, some things had followed him. And now, everything he'd tried to avoid had pulled him back. In the bed of his truck rested 2 duffel bags, one full of clothes, the other full of firefighting gear he no longer needed. What weighed heavier than both was the guilt. He had not made it back in time for the funeral. His father had died alone. The first night back, he slept on the old couch in the living room, though slept was a generous term. Dreams chased him, memories of smoke-choked hallways and sirens, and his father's face looking disappointed across a dinner table they had not shared in years. The next morning, Ethan woke before the sun. Out of habit more than need, he made black coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The fields stretched out, brown and gold under the early light. As he leaned against the railing, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he noticed movement near the fence line. At first he thought it was a coyote or maybe a deer, but as the figure came into focus, Ethan's breath caught. A dog. A large pit bull stood beneath the old ash tree at the western edge of the property. The animal's coat was a patchwork of dark gray and white, though dirt and dust masked much of its color. A long scar traced across its left muzzle, like a reminder of battles fought long ago. The dog did not bark or growl. It simply stood watch, ears forward, eyes fixed on Ethan. "Where'd you come from, boy?" Ethan called softly. The pit bull did not move. Ethan crossed the yard cautiously, stopping just short of the fence. Up close, he could see the dog was lean but not starving. It had the look of an animal that had survived on its own for some time, but had once known the care of humans. The pit bull wore an old collar, the leather cracked and stiff. Dangling from it was a small, tarnished pendant. Curious, Ethan crouched low, extending a hand. The dog watched him carefully, but did not retreat. Slowly, Ethan reached for the pendant and turned it over. Engraved into the metal was a single letter, D. He frowned. The letter stirred no memories. No family names or ranch brands matched it. D. He repeated quietly. Does that mean Dawson? Donnelly? Daniels? The dog tilted his head, as if considering the question. Ethan examined the pit bull closer and spotted something else. Beneath the collar, the fur showed faint patterns where a harness or vest had once rubbed. The mark was unmistakable to anyone familiar with working dogs. "You were trained," Ethan whispered. Not just a stray. He thought back to his father's days as a volunteer with the county search and rescue. Everett Cole had trained dogs for years. Bloodhounds, shepherds, even a few unlikely breeds like labs and retrievers. But never a pit bull. Or so Ethan had believed. A memory surfaced. He was 16. His father had brought home a young pit bull for a short-term training project. "Not every hero looks like you'd expect," Everett had said, but the dog had been returned to its owner, and Ethan had never thought of it again. Could this be the same animal? The idea seemed impossible. A dog's lifespan rarely stretched beyond 15 years. And yet, the scarred face and wise eyes of this pit bull told a story of endurance that defied the ordinary. Ethan exhaled slowly. "If you're here for a reason, I guess I'd better find out what it is." He opened the gate. To his surprise, the pit bull stepped through without hesitation, padding across the yard as if he belonged. By the end of the day, the dog had made himself at home, resting near the porch with his head between his paws. Ethan brought him water and scraps from the modest meal he cooked, leftover chicken and plain rice. That night, as Ethan sat on the steps watching the stars emerge, the dog sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "I can't keep calling you, hey dog." The pit bull looked up, ears perked. "Ranger," Ethan decided aloud. "Seems right." The dog didn't object. In the days that followed, Ranger shadowed Ethan everywhere. As Ethan mended fences, cleared debris from the barn, and sorted through his father's old paperwork, Ranger remained nearby. He didn't demand attention. He simply observed, present and steady. Ethan could not shake the feeling that Ranger had arrived with a purpose. On the third morning, while digging through a box of his father's belongings, Ethan found a photo. It showed Everett standing beside a younger version of himself, both grinning awkwardly at the camera. Between them sat a Pitbull puppy. The same scar traced the pup's muzzle. Ethan's breath left him in a rush. His father had kept no records of where the dog had gone after training. But now, years later, the dog had returned. Not by chance. Ranger had come back carrying more than scars. He carried a legacy Ethan had not yet begun to understand. And the pendant, the letter D, was the first piece of a puzzle that would soon lead them into the shadows of the past, toward a secret neither man nor dog could ignore. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled Harper Dawson's senses as she drifted back to consciousness. Bright overhead lights stabbed at her eyes. For a long moment she didn't know where she was. Then the sterile white walls and quiet hum of medical monitors told her the truth. A hospital. Pain throbbed in her temples. Her throat felt raw, every swallow scraping like sandpaper. When she tried to sit up, the IV line tugged at her wrist. "You're awake." The calm voice came from a nurse at the foot of the bed, clipboard in hand. "Take it slow. You've been through quite an ordeal." Harper licked her cracked lips. How did I get here?" "The man who found you said his dog led him to an old cabin in the woods. You were unconscious. Hypothermic. Dehydrated. Lucky to be alive." Lucky. Harper wasn't sure she believed in luck anymore. The nurse checked her vitals, then disappeared to call the doctor. Harper closed her eyes briefly. Images blurred together in her mind. The rain, the cold floor, the sound of a door slamming shut. The flash of a flashlight, and a stranger's face, shadowed but steady, pulling her out of the dark. Later that afternoon, when the doctor cleared her for a short visit, Ethan Cole stepped quietly into her room. He wore a simple plaid shirt and jeans, his hair damp from the rain. His eyes held a kind of quiet strength Harper recognized instantly, the look of someone who had carried heavy burdens without complaint. "I'm Ethan," he said gently. "The one who found you." "And your dog," Harper added, a faint smile touching her lips, despite the ache in her chest. "Don't forget him." Ethan chuckled softly. "Ranger, he's the real hero." For a moment they sat in silence. Then Harper took a deep breath. "I owe you more than I can say." "You owe me nothing." "But I'd like to know what happened if you're ready to talk." Harper hesitated. She had kept the story to herself for so long it almost felt like it belonged to someone else. But looking at Ethan, the man who had carried her out of a nightmare, she felt a cautious sense of trust. "I came back to Montana to find a piece of my family's past," she began. "The cabin, it used to belong to my grandfather, Thomas Dawson." The name stirred something in Ethan's memory, but he said nothing. Harper continued. "Years ago, before I was born, there was a bitter fight over property. Money, land, all the usual things that tear families apart. My grandfather was cast out. My father barely spoke of it. When he did, it was always in anger or sorrow." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "After my father passed away last year, I found letters tucked in his belongings. Old yellowed paper. Some were from my grandfather. Some mentioned a ranch, the Dawson homestead, and a name I didn't recognize at the time." Her eyes met Ethan's. "Everett Cole." "Your father," Ethan stiffened, surprise flickering across his face. "My dad? I didn't know he had any connection to the Dawsons." Harper nodded. "I didn't either. That's why I came here, to find answers. I thought if I could uncover the truth, maybe I'd understand why my family was haunted by so much anger and shame." She swallowed hard. "But someone didn't want me digging. I found more letters hidden in the cabin. Correspondence between my grandfather and someone named Everett. Before I could read much, I heard someone outside. Footsteps. The door slammed shut. Locked. After that, just darkness. Her voice trembled despite her effort to stay calm. I yelled until my voice was gone. I thought no one would ever find me. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, but Ranger did. Yes, Harper whispered. She looked out the window where storm clouds still gathered over the mountains. If not for him and for you, I wouldn't be here. Ethan sat back, arms crossed. So the cabin was more than just a building. It was the last piece of a family mystery. I believe so, Harper said quietly. And now it seems your family and mine have been connected longer than either of us realized. A heavy silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just weighty, with the realization that fate had spun their lives together in ways neither could have predicted. After a moment, Harper spoke again, her voice steadier. I need to go back to that cabin. Not alone, of course. But there's more to uncover. I can't leave this unfinished. Ethan nodded slowly. I understand. We'll figure this out together. Harper's shoulders relaxed, a tension she hadn't even known she carried easing slightly. For years she had been called the one who stirred up old ghosts by relatives who wanted the past buried. But now, for the first time, someone wasn't telling her to stop. Someone was willing to walk beside her into the shadows of history. And thanks to Ranger, the scarred Pitbull with the silent wisdom of 1,000 miles, they had a guide who had already proven he could lead them from darkness into light. Whatever secrets the cabin still held, Harper Dawson no longer had to face them alone. The morning they returned to the cabin, the sky was a pale wash of gray. A cold breeze whispered through the grass as Ethan tightened the straps on the small pack he carried. Flashlights, gloves, rope, and a first aid kit, just in case. Harper stood beside him, bundled in her father's old canvas jacket. Though her body had healed, the weight of the past still pressed heavy on her shoulders. She was determined, but Ethan could see the nerves in the way she clutched a folded piece of paper, the inventory list of the letters they had already recovered from the cabin, the ones that had left more questions than answers. And beside them stood Ranger. The Pitbull moved with quiet purpose, ears alert, tail held steady. He had no leash. He didn't need one. Ranger seemed to understand that this journey wasn't just for curiosity's sake. It was a mission. Ready? Ethan asked softly. Harper nodded. As I'll ever be. They followed the trail through the woods, boots crunching over fallen leaves and damp earth. Ranger trotted ahead, pausing now and then to glance back, as if checking that his humans kept up. The cabin emerged from the shadows like a relic from another life. Weathered boards, a sagging roofline, and that crooked door, the same one Ethan had broken down the night he rescued Harper. Harper hesitated at the threshold, her breath catching. Ethan touched her elbow gently. You don't have to do this. I do, she whispered. I can't spend the rest of my life haunted by what I don't know. Ranger moved to the door, pressing his nose against it. A low, almost reassuring chuff escaped him, as though telling them it was safe, for now. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old memories. Dust motes floated in the sunlight, streaming through a broken window. The room where Harper had been found was unchanged, though the authorities had removed the debris and cleared a path. Harper pulled out the inventory sheet. There were more letters mentioned in one of the notes I found. They have to be here somewhere. As she and Ethan searched, turning over loose floorboards, prying open warped cabinets, Ranger moved with them. The Pitbull's head tilted now and then, ears flicking toward unseen sounds. More than once he placed himself between Harper and the darker corners of the cabin, his body stiff with silent vigilance. After nearly an hour of searching, Ethan spotted a narrow gap behind the old stone fireplace. "There's something here." With careful hands, he cleared away debris and reached into the gap. His fingers closed around a bundle wrapped in oilskin. He pulled it free, the fabric crackling with age. Inside were letters, faded, some torn at the edges, the ink smudged, but still legible. Harper knelt beside him, unfolding the first sheet. It was addressed to Everett Cole. "Everett, I can't bear the weight of this alone anymore. We've both carried this secret for too long. We made a mistake that night, a mistake that took a life. We swore to protect the family left behind, but silence has cost us our own families. Maybe it's time they knew." Harper's hands trembled as she turned to the next letter, this one in Everett's handwriting. "Thomas, I won't let the truth destroy them. Your son, my son, they deserve peace, not the burden we've carried. We'll keep our promise. We owe that much to Daniel's memory." The room seemed to tilt around Harper. She pressed a hand to her chest. "Daniel," she whispered, "that was my grandfather's younger brother. He died in a hunting accident when he was 17. Ethan's brow furrowed. "But it wasn't just an accident, was it?" Harper shook her head slowly. "No. My grandfather and your father were there. Something happened. A mistake. Daniel died, and they kept it hidden." The next letter confirmed it. A tragic mishap, a misfire, a panicked decision to cover it up. Everett and Thomas had vowed to take care of Daniel's surviving family as a form of silent atonement. Over the years, they had sent anonymous financial help, arranged job opportunities, and even, though neither child had ever known, helped guide Harper's and Ethan's early careers from a distance. But the secrecy had also bred resentment and misunderstanding. Thomas Dawson's family viewed him as a coward who abandoned his own blood. Everett Cole became a distant, emotionally closed man. Harper lowered the letters, tears filling her eyes. "I was never just the granddaughter stirring up old ghosts. I was the one they were trying to protect, the one they owed everything to." Ethan placed a steady hand over hers. "And now, we finally know why." Ranger, who had been sitting silently near the fireplace, rose and walked over. He rested his head against Harper's knee, a soft, reassuring weight. His eyes held none of the judgment or sorrow that clouded human hearts, just the quiet, enduring loyalty of one who had borne witness to generations of mistakes and silent redemption. Harper stroked the Pitbull's scarred muzzle. "You knew, didn't you? Not the words, maybe. But you felt it." Ranger let out a low, contented breath. Ethan nodded toward the letters. "We should take these back. There's more to read, more to understand." As they gathered the papers, the late afternoon sun slipped through the cracked window, casting long shadows across the floor. They were no longer just two people seeking answers. They were the heirs to a legacy of guilt, sacrifice, and now, truth. And leading them forward was a scarred Pitbull who, somehow, had always known the way. The days that followed their discovery in the cabin passed in a blur of reading, piecing together timelines, and silent reckoning. Harper and Ethan spent hours by the kitchen table at the ranch. Letters and faded photographs spread between them. Every line they uncovered unraveled more of the tangled history binding their families. The guilt, the promises, the quiet atonement. But not everyone wanted those truths to surface. Harper had an uneasy feeling from the start. She noticed a pickup truck parked too long on the gravel road near the ranch. Footsteps in the brush, when no one should have been there. Ethan had dismissed it at first. Old habits from years in firefighting and small-town living where strangers always felt like threats. But Harper's instincts were sharp. She knew someone was watching. It wasn't long before they learned who. One afternoon, Sheriff's Deputy Carter stopped by the ranch. A solid man in his late 50s, Carter had known Ethan's father and kept a watchful eye on Ethan and Harper since the rescue. "There's been talk," Carter said, glancing toward the fields where Ranger roamed, nose to the ground. "A man named Hank Dillard's been asking questions about you two." "About the cabin. You know him?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Dillard worked for my dad years ago." "A ranch hand?" Carter nodded grimly. "His family was close to the coal property line. He's got a stake in some land adjacent to the old Dawson tract. If that cabin's tied to your inheritance, he might be nervous about what you found." Harper felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "He's the one who locked me in that night, isn't he?" Carter sighed. "Can't prove it yet. But it's a good guess." Neither Ethan nor Harper said much after Carter left. But that evening, when the sky darkened and the wind sharpened against the windows, Ranger grew restless. He paced the length of the porch, ears pricked, tail stiff. "Something's out there," Ethan muttered, setting down his coffee. Harper moved beside him, her hand brushing his. Rangers felt it all along. They checked the locks, made sure the horses were secured. Still, an uneasy hush clung to the night like fog. 2 nights later, the storm came. Wind lashed the trees, thunder rolled over the hills, and somewhere out in the darkness, danger waited. It wasn't until near midnight that the scent of smoke reached Ethan's window. Ranger was the first to react. The Pitbull let out a sharp, urgent bark, then another. He raced from the porch toward the woods. Ethan was already pulling on boots. Harper grabbed a flashlight. "The cabin!" she gasped. "It's the cabin!" They followed Ranger into the night, heartbeats thundering louder than the storm overhead. When they broke through the tree line, flames were already licking up the side of the old cabin. The fire cast a hellish glow against the dark woods, smoke curling into the stormy sky. "No," Harper whispered. "The letters. The truth. All at risk of being consumed. But even worse, a shadow moved near the cabin's edge. A man, dragging something heavy. A gas can. Ethan recognized the figure instantly. "Hank!" Dillard turned, face twisted in fury. "You should have left it buried," he shouted over the roar of the fire. "None of this was meant to come out. That land, it's mine by right. You and that girl want to steal it from me." "You locked her in that cabin," Ethan said, his voice low with rage. "She was snooping, trying to take what's mine. I just wanted her gone." As Hank advanced, something snapped in the underbrush. Ranger surged forward with a growl, positioning himself between the man and Harper. The fire's light danced in the Pitbull's eyes, highlighting the old scar across his flank, the mark of past battles and quiet loyalty. "Get back," Ethan warned. "It's over, Hank." But Hank didn't listen. He lunged toward Harper. Ranger was faster. With a bark that split the night, the Pitbull leapt. His body struck Hank squarely, knocking the man off balance. They crashed to the ground, Ranger's teeth clamped gently, but firmly on Hank's sleeve. Not attacking, restraining. The fire crackled louder, dangerously close now. "Harper, call Carter," Ethan barked. He moved to pull Hank away from the flames while Harper fumbled for her phone. Within minutes, Carter arrived, sirens wailing through the night. Deputies swarmed the scene. Hank didn't resist anymore. Ranger's intervention, and the weight of the evidence against him, had broken whatever defiance he once carried. Carter slapped cuffs on him. "You've got a lot to answer for." Not just the fire, but 30 years of lies. Hank's shoulders slumped. It was supposed to stay buried, he muttered. Harper stood silent, watching the flames consume the old cabin, the place where the past had almost claimed her life twice. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The truth's out now. But even as they watched, the fire took the last remnants of the physical history they had unearthed. Letters could be rewritten. Memories could be preserved. But it was Ranger, silent, scarred, and steadfast, who had saved more than just lives that night. He had saved the truth. And in doing so, he had guarded not only the legacy of two families, but the fragile hope of healing across generations. The ashes of the old cabin had barely cooled when Harper and Ethan made their decision. They refused to let the past be remembered only for its tragedies. "We can't just rebuild it for ourselves," Harper said one morning as they walked the perimeter where the cabin once stood. The earth was blackened but soft underfoot, as though ready for renewal. "That place took lives. Nearly took mine, but it also saved us. It can save others." Ethan nodded slowly, gazing across the land. The hills rolled gently away into the horizon. The same fields his father had once worked. The same woods where Ranger had led him to Harper in her darkest hour. "What do you have in mind?" he asked quietly. Harper unfolded a rough sketch she had drawn on a notepad the night before. "We rebuild. Not just as a memorial. We make it into a rescue training center for veterans like you. For seniors. For kids in Lone Ridge who have nowhere else to turn." Ethan stared at the page. Her ideas were rough but clear. A wide, sturdy building with training rooms. Outdoor spaces for search and rescue drills. Quiet areas where dogs could bond with their new handlers. "And Ranger," Harper added, smiling faintly. "He can be our honorary trainer. The Guardian. That's what the kids already call him." Ethan felt his throat tighten. The image of the scarred Pitbull standing protectively by Harper's hospital bed came flooding back. Ranger had always been more than a pet. He was the silent witness to their journey and their salvation. "I think my dad would have approved," Ethan said softly. They began at once. Harper used a portion of the inheritance left from her family's estate. Ethan sold off a small, unused parcel of the ranch, land his father had once set aside for expansion that never came. Neither decision was easy. Letting go of even a fragment of their past felt like peeling away old protective layers. But they knew healing demanded sacrifice. Volunteers arrived without being asked. Carter, the deputy who had once been wary of Ethan's return, brought lumber and gathered other off-duty officers to help pour the foundation. Clara, the town's cafe owner, organized bake sales and donation drives, raising more money than Harper thought possible. Even the high school students pitched in, painting fences, clearing brush, and designing the first training obstacle course. But the heart of the project was always Ranger. The Pitbull, once a mystery himself, became the anchor for the community's hopes. His calm, patient demeanor made him the perfect companion for nervous veterans, elderly volunteers with shaky hands, and children unsure of their place in the world. They watched as Ranger demonstrated how to stay calm in a simulated search mission, how to lead without fear, how to trust. One child, a quiet boy named Mason, who had lost his father in a car accident, clung to Ranger with a fierce, unspoken need. The dog seemed to understand. He never left Mason's side during training sessions, even sleeping curled up at the boy's feet during lunch breaks. "Ranger doesn't pick favorites," Harper whispered to Ethan one day as they watched. "But I think he knows who needs him most." Ethan simply nodded, too moved to speak. As weeks turned to months, the once charred clearing transformed into something unrecognizable. Where smoke and fear had once lingered, bright murals now covered the new building's outer walls. Scenes of mountains, forests, and dogs working alongside humans. In one corner, a painting of Ranger stood tall above a simple inscription, "The Guardian who led us home." On the center's opening day, townspeople gathered beneath the crisp autumn sky. Veterans in uniform stood shoulder to shoulder with ranchers, teachers, and wide-eyed children. Harper stepped up to the podium, voice trembling not from fear but from the weight of the journey that had brought them here. "This land once held secrets," she began. "It held pain. But thanks to all of you, and one remarkable dog, we've turned it into something better. A place where the past can be remembered without regret. A place where healing begins." Ranger stood beside her, wearing a simple leather collar embossed with the words, "The Guardian." When she finished, the crowd erupted into applause. But it wasn't just the adults who cheered. The loudest voices belonged to the children. Mason stepped forward and gently placed a wreath of autumn leaves around Ranger's neck. "Thank you," he whispered. Harper felt tears sting her eyes. She glanced at Ethan, who stood quietly at the edge of the gathering, pride shining in his eyes. This, Harper thought, is what our fathers wanted. Not silence, not shame, but redemption. As dusk fell and families lingered around campfires, Ethan and Harper walked the grounds together. Ranger padded between them, calm as ever. "You know," Ethan said, his voice soft against the hum of voices and distant laughter, "when I first came back to Montana, I thought I was here to say goodbye. To the ranch, to my father, to everything." Harper reached for his hand. "And now?" He squeezed her fingers gently. "Now I realize I came back to start something new." They paused at the mural of Ranger. The painted sky behind the dog seemed to stretch endlessly, just like the real Montana horizon above them. Harper leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. "We all came back for a reason. And we're not alone," Ethan added, looking down at Ranger. The Pitbull met his gaze, eyes steady and wise. As the stars began to prick the night sky, the three stood together, man, woman, and dog, no longer bound by the weight of old secrets, but uplifted by the new legacy they had built with their own hands, their own hearts. And in the gentle hush of that autumn night, it was clear to everyone in Lone Ridge that some family bonds are not born by blood alone. Some are forged in fire, healed by forgiveness, and guarded forever by a loyal heart with 4 paws. Winter laid a quiet, white blanket over Montana. Snow clung to the branches of the tall ash tree that stood watch over the rebuilt cabin. What had once been a place of secrets and sorrow now bore a new sign above its door. The Haven under the ash tree. The name wasn't just symbolic. It was a promise. Harper and Ethan had created more than just a rescue training center. They had built a family, a community of people who had once felt like outcasts or wanderers. Veterans seeking purpose. Seniors seeking company. Children seeking hope. And at the heart of it all was Ranger. The Pitbull, once a scarred and silent drifter, now belonged fully to this land and these people. No fence ever kept him in, yet he never left. He had found his place. His purpose. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was the guardian. The one who had brought Ethan and Harper together. The one who had led them through fire, both literal and emotional, to a future neither had dared to imagine. Each morning, Ranger stood at the training field's edge, watching over the veterans as they learned to work alongside the next generation of search and rescue dogs. Harper often joked that Ranger was tougher than any of the human trainers. The kids simply called him Captain, Though time had added a few new scars to Ranger's old ones, his eyes remained bright, his spirit unbroken. Inside the cabin, now bright with warmth, books, and photographs, the past and the present lived side by side. One wall displayed the framed letters that Harper and Ethan had salvaged from the ashes. Another held photos of the dogs and handlers who had trained here, including candid shots of children hugging Ranger, seniors smiling as they taught dogs simple commands, and veterans shaking hands in moments of triumph. In the evenings, when snow fell gently outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Harper and Ethan would sit together by the window, often joined by Mason, the quiet boy who had once clung to Ranger as if the dog were his last lifeline. Mason was thriving now, helping train younger kids and studying to become a veterinary assistant. He often rested his hand on Ranger's head as he spoke, as if drawing quiet strength from the dog who had once rescued him in ways no human could. One December night, as the northern lights shimmered faintly in the sky, Ethan opened the old leather journal he had inherited from his father. Most of its pages were now filled with his own handwriting, stories, reflections, and lessons learned over these long, transformative months. That evening, he added a final entry. Some debts cannot be paid with money. We repay them with love, forgiveness, and quiet acts of courage. Ranger taught me that. So did Harper, and so did this land. As he closed the journal, Harper leaned against him, her hand slipping into his. "We've come a long way," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "And we still have far to go." She smiled. "Good. I'm not ready to stop." Outside, Ranger lifted his head toward the distant sound of an approaching vehicle. A late-arriving volunteer or maybe a neighbor dropping off supplies. Even now he remained vigilant. But when he caught Ethan's eye through the window, the dog's gaze softened. The battle for this place, for this family, had been won. As the snow continued to fall, blanketing the earth in quiet purity, Harper, Ethan, and Ranger stood at the doorway of the haven under the ash tree. Not just a house, not just a center, a home. Not bound by blood, but by choice, by loyalty, by love. And under that wide Montana sky, where past and future met beneath the silent branches of the old ash tree, three souls, one man, one woman, and one faithful dog, watched over the family they had built together. They had found not just healing, they had found belonging. As the Montana snow fell and the past was laid to rest, Ethan, Harper, and Ranger built something that no fire, no secret, and no time could erase. A home where healing triumphed over heartbreak. As the great Fred Rogers once said, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." Ranger was the first helper. Ethan and Harper chose to follow. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to become part of the Veilmarks family. Subscribe, leave a comment, and share your thoughts. Your support is not just a number. It is the reason we can continue creating powerful, meaningful stories that remind us all. Family is not just where we begin. It is where we choose to stay. Thank you for watching.